atheist who doesn't believe that anything happens after you die, right? If you think there's no rebirth, there's no reincarnation, and you think there's no heaven or hell, and if you really think you get something like a dial tone when you die, well, many people are left expecting some kind of oblivion, some permanent loss of experience. And so this notion of oblivion is a kind of reification, but if you think about it more clearly, that's precisely the kind of thing you would not experience. I mean, if it's simply the end of experience, well, then you're not going to be experiencing the end of experience, right? This is not you didn't experience an absence before you were born.
Right. Well, the idea that you would experience is implicit in the way the question is framed.
Right. So there's nothing you're going to suffer. I mean, this is something that Epicurus pointed out, that death is nothing for us. Where we are, death is not, and where death is, we are not. Right. Like they're just non-overlapping sets of facts, whatever those facts are. If in fact death is the end of experience, so which is to say, there's nothing to worry about, really.
That last part that Sam just said, there's nothing to worry about, really. On the contrary, if you know what Sam is actually talking about, it's called generic subjective continuity. And in his podcast episode, The Paradox of Death, which is on his Making Sense podcast, I suggest listening to the entire thing on his website, samharris.org. It's behind a paywall, so you can do the $15 a month, or you can even Sam can give you access for free. Anyways, if you know anything about generic subjective continuity, which Sam has been kind of promoting that idea lately, on his, like I said, in his podcast, and Annika Harris has also been talking about it, and she is going to be releasing a podcast with Tom Clark, the person who coined the term generic subjective continuity, in his essay Death, Nothingness, and Subjectivity on his website naturalism.org. And if you're familiar with generic subjective continuity, then you know that after this, your conscious experience right now, after this experience ends, it will be followed by yet another subjective experience of being. Now, I'm not saying, whenever I say being, I'm not implying that it will be a continuation of you. Here's how you think about it. In the same way that you didn't exist before birth, but then a brain was born, and then that brain caused this subjective experience right now. After you no longer exist once again, because brains will be born and they will cause subjective experiences at that point in time, then that means after you die, death will be followed by one of those subjective experiences via one of those brains that are alive at that point in time after this current experience ends, aka after you die. And so, for Sam to say there's nothing to worry about, I disagree, because if generic subjective continuity is true, then that means that death could be followed by the subjective experience of perhaps, say, being a pig in a factory farm, which, as if any of you have watched Cosmic Skeptic's latest video promoting veganism, well, you definitely don't want to be a pig in a factory farm. Or even if you know about the brutal lives of wild animals, there's videos on YouTube you can watch about what it's like to be perhaps a gazelle in the wild, and you can watch them get torn to shreds alive by lions, or hyenas and other animals, or crocodiles, and so on and so forth. So there's endless, or perhaps being born into as a human in a family that is highly abusive. Who knows what? Like there was a woman who her father locked her down in the basement for years on end in her life. Um, and there's countless stories, or perhaps being a Jew, the time of a Holocaust, or whatever things may occur in the future of the human race, or who knows what kinds of suffering sentient beings out in the universe might endure. Um, so yeah, there actually is something to worry about if what Sam is promoting and what Tom Clark believes is the case for what happens after we die. Um, and and something I like to point out is that if generic subjective continuity is true, then we have a very good reason to uh, do away with and outlaw factory farms, or at least to majorly improve the lives of those animals in those places. Um, and another point I like to make is that if we did outlaw factory farms and eating meat altogether, then there would be no chance. The only option for animals would be to live in the wild only. And so we must ask ourselves, would I rather be an animal born in the wild, or would I rather be a animal born perhaps on a uh, free range farm, where maybe in somebody's backyard, where you actually get to live a good life compared to an animal in the wild that, you know, there's all kinds of suffering in the wild if you know anything about it. But there's also a lot of good things about living in the wild too. There's pros and cons. But ultimately, if I were to choose a life, say perhaps as a chicken, I would want to live in, like, my dad has a small chicken coop in his backyard. I'd want to be one of those chickens rather than a chicken in the wild that might, starve to death or freeze to death or who knows what, get torn to shreds by a fox. Um, so yeah, the that's my thoughts on this. So go ahead and read Tom Clark's essay "Death, Nothingness, and Subjectivity" on naturalism.org, and check out my other videos on the topic. And yeah, check out Sam's podcast on that topic.